Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman with a brand new haircut, looking fresh and ready to talk about some of LSU's recent recruiting success, predominantly out of state, as well as, a big in-state commitment heading to a familiar program in Houston that we've talked a lot about on the show, and a lot of upcoming dates of note for recruiting fans to know around Louisiana, some big ones this weekend and beyond. Sam, we officially have a little intro theme song that I believe you wrote and played and recorded and sent me. So if folks want to hear the full track, they can follow your SoundCloud and pick up some more of your dope musical takes to go with that dope new haircut. What's up, man?
Doing great. It was exhausting. I was up late last night recording, obviously. But to get a fine tune like that, I'm super pleased with the results, despite being short on sleep. And if you want to subscribe to my SoundCloud or to Spotify, all of my premium stuff it's even better.
I hope folks really appreciate the effort that you put in there. And I can't wait to hear the feedback. But I mentioned we're going to start with these three LSU commitments over the span of about 36 hours. Zion Williams and Brandon Brown and Damian Shanklin all July 4th and 5th, and a much needed boost for the future of that defensive line group. Kind of initial reactions for you. I mean, some notable beef added to that defensive front with Bo Davis and Blake Baker and company headed to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, man, I guess it's grilling season, and they were looking for some beef to steal your line. Brandon Brown was obviously an early commitment for the Longhorns when Bo Davis was Texas's defensive line coach. They got him on campus, worked him out after official visits to Texas and to getting back to Baton Rouge. That was a flip that LSU obviously felt that they needed. They needed to add some more size in the interior of their defensive line. We've talked about that at length here on the podcast. And Damian Shanklin going into the Midwest. We know that LSU has dipped into this part of the country at different points. So kudos to that. Damian Shanklin gives them a big body on the edge. I think that LSU's kind of this is just I think he's just one of the more underrated players in the country coming from the Midwest. But gives you size at the defensive end position. I think he also has position versatility to play inside. So I really like the Damian Shanklin get over Ohio State and Alabama. And then Zion Williams from East Texas. This was a really interesting recruitment, having covered Zion in the past from Lufkin, one of the powerhouses in East Texas, a really esteemed program. It's produced a lot of great players like Des Bryant in years past. But Zion, to me personally, I've had this conversation with my Texas high school football crew, Jared, not to make you any too envious, but that he has the upside to probably be the best defensive tackle in the state for 2025. It's a really deep and talented group, and you have a lot of position versatile kids that could play end or inside. So could see how that develops over time. But Zion as a true defensive tackle, we talked about obviously LSU wanting to add size. Zion adds that. He adds athleticism. He has raw innate power, and the physical presence that he provides. He commands multiple blockers on the inside. And I think he's just starting to tap into his potential as a pass rusher. We'll see how that when he gets into LSU's strength and conditioning program and develops from there. But really successful couple of days for LSU, especially at what is definitely a premium position for LSU in their roster construction right now.
This stretch reminded me a little bit, and I don't want to set off alarm bells for LSU fans, but I remember the 2023 class, and I happened to have a trip to Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, kind of a little trip visiting Tyler Batiste up there. And then we had our friends, Jonathan and Christina's wedding in Cincinnati. So we road tripped over there. And during this entire trip around 4th of July week, I was prepping for Rivals, oldtigerdetails.com, all of these commitment stories from all over the country that were set to pop off that weekend. And the way that played out, part of what also kind of triggered my memory a little bit was Josh Mickens from up at Lawrence Central in Indianapolis, an edge rusher up there who committed to LSU over others. He ends up at Ohio State. Some of those other commitments didn't pan out, whether during the recruiting process or, Jackson Howard transferring and stuff like that. what is, for an LSU fan who maybe slips into some firework PTSD and remembers that didn't go as great as they had hoped, perhaps with that 23 group that was all popping off in early July, what do you feel like can make this recruiting haul different, both in terms of who ends up on campus and how it pans out once they get there?
Unfortunately, I don't have a great response for that. This is the way. This is a product of summertime recruiting. There's a huge wave from June to August as kids make these pivotal official visits. They lock in their decisions, and then they get ready for their senior seasons, thinking that their recruitment is 9/10 out of the way. But there is that 1/10. They're letting their mind wander, especially if you're an out of state kid, especially if you're from a different part of the country. Depending on how your senior season is going. There's so many different factors that go into this. But, for someone like Damian Shanklin, who's from Indianapolis, it's going to be on LSU to kind of continue to pump up the love with one of the best from out of state in their class. It's on LSU's staff to continue to get him on campus. And, Ohio State isn't going to stop trying to get him to Columbus, which is an easier drive. Alabama's not going to try to stop to get them to Tuscaloosa for the big games. It's a product of recruiting them to commit and then recruiting them afterwards. And it's easier to do when it's in your home state or nearby in your region. It's a little bit more difficult when you're LSU and your SEC country trying to recruit Indianapolis. But it's up to this staff, and I think that they have the personnel to do that. And we'll see how the waves go, because LSU could also get some new different defensive line targets in that time. We talked about the summertime commitment wave. Well, it's also flip season, right around as Halloween gets here, as the weather gets a little bit chillier. There's a whole second wave of commitments leading into the early signing period. So it works both ways.
I feel at this point I'm just putting LSU fans on a roller coaster of emotions, because my thoughts on why to feel a little bit more confidently is that was obviously the early months of Brian Kelly and a lot of transition in the staff, and just there wasn't quite as much proof of concept and stability just yet as there is now. I think also the similarity of Josh Mickens as a big edge rusher from Indianapolis, Damian Shanklin. I think Josh was kind of a later riser in terms of his recruiting process really taking off. And so I think a lot has already been laid out before Damian, and he has been extremely vocal the last few days about his love for LSU and trying to push, Cade Phillips before his announcement saying he needs to come. DJ Pickett, he's got to make sure when he commits later this month. And so kind of where some of these guys are in their recruitments and already having those options, but still locking into LSU. And then also the big one, Bryce Underwood as a national scale quarterback who every high school player potentially wants to play with. As much as Ricky Collins is as near and dear to my heart in that 23 class as LSU commitment as any, he doesn't necessarily carry the same level of national recognition that these guys from a national class all kind of know who he is and what to expect as Bryce right now, who carries a certain cachet with him. So I'm just trying to, I put LSU fans in an uncomfortable spot there a minute ago. I'm trying to give you the reasons to feel a little bit more confidently and not get too down after my initial question.
Well, your boy Joe Sloan spends plenty of time in the Midwest, and Bryce Underwood is one player I would say LSU fans can be very confident from the Midwest that does not seem poised to make any decisions other than sign with LSU and enroll right as soon as his senior season wraps up at Belleville, Michigan. If that puts their mind at ease, Jarrett.
You mentioned, the flip season of October. We'll hit on a couple of other, a couple of notable LSU connected one-time LSU commits headed elsewhere, new announcement dates, whatnot, and then kind of transition into some of the other notable Louisiana prospects recruiting updates. Also, during that 4th of July stretch, we got the commitment announcement, I guess technically, first from Pete Thamel and then also from DeCorian Moore himself, that DeCorian was now going to be committed to Oregon. He had a lot of different phases of that commitment announcement roll out a few days ago, but he's headed out west now to the Ducks as it seems. Thoughts on that? Because even after the LSU reopening, stepping back off the commitment, et cetera, it seemed like Texas and maybe even Ohio State were so heavily involved. But as you mentioned numerous times, talking about DeCorian, that Oregon was going to be in that mix too. Thoughts on that announcement, DeCorian Moore to Oregon?
Yeah, don't say I didn't warn you that the Ducks were quacking with DeCorian. You already know that I think DeCorian's the number one wide receiver in the class. I've been on the record multiple times. I think he is electric. Does so many different things well at Duncanville. They get him the ball in space really well. He can stretch the field really well. He's got elite hands. He could jump out of the gym. He's just about 6 foot or so. He just has tons of shades of Jamar to his game, and I think he's the closest sort of prospect that reminds me of Jamar, with his ability to kind of attack at all different levels of the field and kind of do so pretty seamlessly. You got to credit Oregon, even when DeCorian was committed to LSU in January. He had told me that Oregon was the team that was recruiting him hardest back then. And that was even though that there was still confidence in Austin about their chances of keeping DeCorian home, and before Ohio State had even entered the mix. Now, Ohio State certainly made this thing interesting over the summer. Maybe even number 2 on that list at a certain point. But I think ultimately it came down to Oregon and Texas. I don't think Texas is going to stop recruiting DeCorian, but you have to credit Junior Adams. You have to credit Dan Lanning. You have to credit your boy Antonio Parks in the recruitment of DeCorian Moore. Like I said, since January has been the team pushing all the right buttons with not only DeCorian, but the right members of his family, leading into a huge July 4th get for Oregon. They're poised to get a lot of number ones at a lot of premium positions. We're talking about maybe the number 1 safety in the country, and Jonah Williams, also from Texas, number 1 receiver, DeCorian Moore, possibly the number 1 corner in the country, DJ Pickett, as you mentioned earlier. They're trending in a really good spot with a lot of those number ones. And you got to credit that staff for getting DeCorian on board early, because once you have them committed, it's easier to play from ahead.
You mentioned Antonio, AP, a guy from down here in Louisiana. You mentioned all these Texas recruits too. It seems like he may have a little bit of familiarity with that neck of the woods at some point before he headed up to Eugene.
Spent some time at UTSA, briefly at Arizona State. Obviously, it's his neck of the woods, and I think he's trying to make his name out there, and I think he's doing a pretty good job.
No doubt. Another guy who is a one-time LSU commit, and we'll kind of start with his commitment announcement for later on this month, and then come back to the ones that are top of mind for this weekend. But Jabari Antoine, who had committed to Corey Raymond and company in January, the early days of Corey's return back to Baton Rouge. And we talked a lot about Jabari through the course of his commitment, and then backing off of that commitment. He's announced a July 20th commitment date now with LSU among his new final 3 with those 2 programs we've talked so much about in Miami and Florida State. How seriously should LSU fans consider the potential that Jab ends up back in this 2025 class for the Tigers? Or is that kind of once you decommit, a little bit of a courtesy or foregone conclusion, or however you want to phrase it or frame it, that he is ultimately headed elsewhere to one of those Florida programs?
Well, certainly there's no such thing as a sure thing when it comes to recruiting, but just about the time of recording, just still more than a week and a half to go before Jab locks in his decision, which he told me will be his final decision. So maybe since he's already been committed to LSU and had a verbal commitment, wants to really shut things down after July 20th. The sense that I had is that LSU is kind of trailing both those Florida schools right now. Obviously, he was in Baton Rouge at the beginning of the summer, but after the official visit to Miami and his official visit to FSU, that was his first time in Tallahassee. A lot of the buzz has been around the Canes. They've been recruiting Jabari for a good amount of time. There's obviously some Louisiana guys on that staff with Coach Dennis Smith and Coach Chivas Jackson as a young DB coach. It's obviously pressed a lot of the right buttons with guys like DJ Pickett and Jabari. You mentioned his time at SFE has opened the door for a couple of extra visits down to Coral Gables. He's been there for a spring practice and his OV. Right now, I view Miami as a team to beat. I don't think LSU is out of this. I'm told that there's still a lot of positive vibes between both the staff and Jabari, and I think that at one point he really did see himself playing in Baton Rouge. I don't know if that door is completely closed, but right now I like where Miami is positioned for this July 20th decision.
We see how quickly fans react, to the positives and negatives, which makes it that much worse that I put him on that roller coaster about 5 minutes ago. But I saw some reaction to even the Cade Phillips commitment to Texas a few days ago. I saw a lot of backlash to, I guess, criticizing Corey or doubting Corey. And I think we need to remember that Corey's only been back with the LSU program for about 6 months now, and that a lot of recruitment starts so much earlier than those final months before commitment, and so having some of that long-standing opportunity to relationship build, before drawing a commitment announcement is a big piece of it. Obviously, the NIL stuff is a big piece of it, where some schools like a Texas are hard for LSU to keep up with more often than not. What are your thoughts on just kind of the early going of Corey's time back in Baton Rouge, and kind of how he's doing, and just your expectations of where he is now versus confidence in him getting some things going with that defensive back group?
Yeah, I don't doubt. I think you said it very correctly, very aptly. Like, he's getting his feet wet back at LSU, and not only is Corey just getting his feet wet again in there. There's a whole new defensive coordinator there. So Blake Baker and him are getting on the same page. I think it's already happening. You see that LSU is kind of prioritized first the defensive line, and how quickly things have matriculated in that department. I think it's only a matter of time as they straighten out their secondary group. I think that things are going to already start picking up. There's a couple of safety prospects that are already trending LSU's way. I think Corey is going to be overseeing the cornerbacks, and I don't think LSU. I think that as he first of all, LSU is still a finalist for DJ Pickett, even if I do think that they're currently kind of running from behind in that regard right now. But a lot of times, when coaches and coordinators get back, it does take them, basically a cycle to kind of get caught up. And usually you start seeing the fruits of those looms paying off in the next cycle. So 2026 might see a couple of number one corners back in LSU's class. Right now, we'll see how Corey reads and reacts from this June wave of some gets and some misses.
Fruits of the loom dropped in there. Nicely.
If we can get a sponsorship, I would love to further that relationship.
Uh, a couple other Louisiana guys. We had Saturday, DK Mays from Central. He announced his commitment to the Houston Cougars as Coach Willie Fritz and company continue to pull notable prospects from Louisiana. They add DK to that defensive front group that already has Rashad Sterling. We talked about, I think last time or one of the last couple of times, Jacob Bradford in the mix. Houston is a finalist for a guy we'll talk about in a second, in Jace Thomas. But DK Mays is a big, physical, versatile defensive line, becoming the latest, H-Town bound Louisiana prospect. How nice is that to see that momentum? I say nice. How nice is that for Coach Fritz and company to see that momentum continue? Because I imagine some fans of some other programs around Louisiana are not loving it.
Yeah, it's not doing me any services, but I'm sure it's doing the Coach Fritz plenty. I love what Houston is doing. I think that's it's like a if in kind of what I was saying about the Texas defensive linemen. There's obviously there's different tiers, and I think that the tier that Houston is hitting on right now is a lot of these very high upside defensive linemen, with DK being maybe my favorite of the group, besides Joshua Lewis of upside, but DK more of that edge presence, super bendy, super athletic, super long, and someone that I'm obviously keeping my eye on going into his senior season. That obviously the Houston staff believes it, and a lot of other schools did as well, that he could be poised for a really productive senior season and has a lot of those traits to maybe transform into a really fantastic player when he gets to Houston on Saturdays, like a lot of these other commitments from Louisiana and also from around Texas, in Houston's 2025 class.
We've seen, LSU offered Rashad Sterling not that long after the commitment. And I think a couple of guys you mentioned in DK and Josh Lewis right here, both, on the edges of Baton Rouge. I think those are guys that within Louisiana's 2025 class are probably interesting senior evals for LSU. Could we see the Tigers come in late for guys like that, Jacob Bradford, and on down the list? But Houston has done such a nice job of getting some of these guys on board, and then for Rashad, having him stick with that commitment despite LSU coming in.
And LSU really wanted Rashad. I remember, the first time we were on campus last month, a lot of buzz about Rashad. He had recently picked up the offer. He had worked out for Coach Davis, and they were really hoping that they were going to be able to change his minds. We obviously see how things progressed over the last few weeks, and who they did get on board. They had to go in a different direction because Houston locked down that commitment pretty from probably playing from behind to start that.
Last but not least, obviously, a couple more of our favorite guys in the Destrehan duo scheduled for some July 13th commitment announcements. Jace Thomas will be midday, has a final five of, we mentioned Houston's in the mix, LSU's in the mix. So definitely an interesting one for Coach Raymond, Coach Baker and company to have their eyes on, as well as his father's alma mater in Ole Miss, Texas Tech, and Colorado. And then Philly, the speedy wide receiver, has LSU, Georgia, and Michigan. So 4 of the past 5 national championships claimed by his 3 finalists. Your thoughts on the Destrehan duo going into there? Again, Jace is midday. Philip will be announcing kind of late afternoon, early evening, depending on where you draw that line. What's your thoughts on those Wildcats with their announcements looming?
Yeah, well, Jace's recruitment has certainly will tie in a lot of the themes of our episode today, Jarrett. Even though he's down to 5, this has really been a Houston LSU battle for the last couple of weeks. If not for picking up that offer from Coach Thompson and Coach Baker a couple of weeks ago at camp, he might be getting ready to commit to Houston this weekend. And I think Houston gave him a lot to consider on his official visit. But credit Coach Baker. I think that they put themselves in a really good spot very quickly and had to overcome a pretty big deficit by Houston. I like where LSU is sitting going into the announcement, but I think Houston is still in this, and I think that they're not going to stop pushing even after this July 13th decision. And then similarly, this has been a really interesting recruitment to watch for Philly Wright. You mentioned, I think, someone who has all the traits with 6 foot plus. Olympic speed over there at Destrehan, getting ready for his more volume as going into his senior year. I think Georgia Tech is a team that had a lot of run early on with Philly. Obviously, LSU is since they offered, he's been to campus quite a few times. But I think Michigan, after his 4 official visits, was the one that moved the needle the biggest with Philly. Ron Bellamy, what he's doing in Louisiana, I think it's a little bit contagious. He already has commitments from 2 4-stars and Jasper Parker, who, again, we talked about last week's episode. I implore people to go listen. How talented the big body running back is for Shaw, and obviously his teammate, Jacob Washington, who you already know, I think is going to challenge to be the best receiver in the state for 2025. I think that they're trending in the right direction with Philly Wright. I think that the combination of not only football and competing for championships like you alluded to, but academics at Michigan, it speaks volumes. Wouldn't be surprised again to see if LSU continues to push in this one, or if Georgia circles back, or Georgia Tech continues to push. But I like where Michigan is headed in, so it could be right now. My forecasts are on LSU and Michigan for the Destrehan dynamic duo.
Yeah, I think that's the expectation going in. I'll be making the rounds to their 2 separate commitment announcements on Saturday to get some more content up for fans that want to make sure to check back on Louisiana versus all y'all for that. And once those commitments are public and whatnot, to kind of get some more of their take on what went into the decision. And also, a happy, we'll say, boot scooting birthday to Jace Thomas, who loves to watch this show and refers to it as the boot scooting show. And so, thankful for him. And I told you earlier off camera, him and Philip have been such a fun couple of young men to cover, and just, they're, in addition to their talent, their off-field personalities and character and whatnot, it's been a lot of fun, as is, the case with a lot of these guys. DK was great to go see on Saturday, but, all eyes now turn to the Destrehan duo on this Saturday.
Yeah, I just spoke to both of them, wishing them congratulations and good luck going into Saturday. Obviously, for Jace, it's his birthday as well, so he was really excited to. A lot of his family is coming in, some family that has not ever seen him play, so they're super excited to see where he ends up, and obviously see a glimpse of what we've talked about. It's just a tremendous offseason for him, and his journey from receiver to DB, and really finding a home at safety, and seeing schools like Houston and Texas Tech and Colorado and LSU and Ole Miss offer. Really fun to see how his recruitment has taken shape. And for Philly, I can remember Coach Scott introducing me to Philly coming into his freshman season at Destrehan. Gosh, I don't even remember who I was originally there for at the time. I think it might have still been who. It might have been Jai. Go check on that class. But meeting Philly as a freshman and watching his recruitment kind of take shape, and obviously he's choosing from, like you said, 3 former teams that compete for national championships year in and year out. So great to see what happens with him.
Thanks to everyone for watching, listening, whatever. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. Appreciate his time. This is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit Dat Boot, and cue up some more of that Sam Spiegelman outro music now.